All right, we are recording. Taylor Trask here with me,
Todd A.
Todd A, and you're listening to the Todd and Taylor Show.
For
But
now.
for now, yeah, exactly. For now, we're debating names as we speak, and we've gotten a few suggestions, even from our very first sort of episode zero, the primordial goo that this show is coming out of. We've got a few people who've gave us some suggestions. What are they?
The first suggestion we have is Todd Lore.
Todd lore.
Kind of a kind of a mashup of our names there.
Sounds like I feel
Um,
like that's if there's a super virus that wipes out humanity, it might be the toddler virus. We'll be like, oh, no,
yes.
and then
Uh,
we'll be very sad about this.
right.
We'll look back on that day like we should have never named our podcast that. So toddlers is one. I sort of like that though. It's obvious. It has
Yeah.
its
I mean, why not Tayod?
Teod. Toddler and
Well,
Teod. Yeah.
honestly, we had talked before we even recorded the first one about um, possibly using our names in some geeky fashion because you are Trask, and
That's
there's of
right.
course what's his name, Trask,
Boulevard
played by Tyrion
Trask.
Lannister
Yeah.
in X-Men: Days of Future Past, the Trask Industries.
Yeah.
And I'm Mr. Anderson, which even just today someone referenced to me,
Nice. See.
which is like literally I get every week,
I was gonna say after the Matrix came out, you must have just been like, God damn it, because
which was hilarious because I didn't see The Matrix for probably a year after it came
what?
out,
Wow.
and then after that I was like meh, and I never saw the other ones.
Yeah, well,
So
that's probably best.
right.
That's, you know what? Let's add that to a future episode because I have an entire like dissertation on what the Matrix could have been, and like there's elements of the second one that I was like, oh, this is where they're headed, and then they just so didn't, and I'm like, okay, so that's
Yeah,
we'll put that in the vault for another day.
I just did that. I just added it to the vault.
Excellent. But there was another episode title that somebody suggested that I thought was
Oh yes.
especially
So then a Twitter friend of mine, Jocelyn Jane Taylor, suggested TNT,
TNT.
to which I responded, "It's like you're reading my mind because we had just made these show notes where I called them TNT."
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
There's something fortuitous about that.
I like AC/DC. I'm down
Yeah,
with that, but it's maybe it's a little too on the nose or something.
yeah.
So when I responded to her with that, I responded with thanks, not 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 no thanks. And so she then suggested we could be heroes.
Oh,
That which I said was a
ooh,
great
yeah.
title because it's not there's not only
We
like
could
kind of
be
a
heroes just for
yeah
one day. What
there's
you say? Ah! Sorry, Dave. If you haven't listened to David Bowie's live album yet, go grab that on whatever music service of choice you have and listen to that song because the live version of "We Can Be Heroes," I like that's my morning jam. That's why when you said that, I was like, oh man, that's like
really
that song's a
okay.
part of my life in a profound way.
I didn't even realize that's why you responded that way to that. That's
Wow,
pretty
it's
cool.
it's Bowie too. It's just
Um,
he's cool.
well, and I also brought up that there's like this lowbrow component to it, which is that the Wallflowers, they they did their best on it, and it ended up in the Godzilla soundtrack. Matthew Broderick, I almost said McConaughey.
Oh my God! So not even the
Broderick,
new one.
that's
I
it.
was when you said
Oh
that,
no
I
no
was
no no!
thinking the
Like
one from last year. I'm
old,
like, I don't recall that at all. But and the
no.
Wallflowers are back together. What? Like, all these questions were swirling in my head. So this was the unspoken Godzilla movie.
Right, so we have some choices. Honestly, I think what you and I have both found is that anytime we come up with what we think is a cool name, it's like it's like what bands do now. We Google it and we find out someone's taken it.
Yeah, although I just googled this. And as we've been talking, I've been looking at podcasts coming. We Could Be Heroes, and I don't see a series called that. I only see like a
Episode titles or
church
something.
title, yeah, it's different things like that. So let's put a soft pin in that
Yeah.
as a series title because I like that a lot actually. And then
Well,
if not, we'll keep looking.
sure. Uh,
But oh, go ahead. Sorry, you were gonna...
No, I was probably going to say exactly what you were going to say with the butt, which is maybe we should just get into this. This is
Yeah.
we're calling episode one.
Episode 1, the first one. So last episode was episode 0 because that was us
Yeah, we were
just
just,
toying around and seeing what worked and all that. But what we want to do at episode 1, since it's the first official one, is introduce who we are and talk about how we met. And I think this goes back to the days of when you and I were both. You're in Nashville now, right? Actually.
Yes.
Yeah, and I
I mean,
used to
I'm in
live
an
in Nashville.
undisclosed
Oh,
location.
sorry,
I
sorry.
move around
That's
the
right. That's
country.
right. Well,
Yeah.
at one point you were in Nashville, as was I, and we both worked at a company in Nashville, and kind of ran into each other. And we were friend. I mean, we didn't hang out all the time, but you were a cool guy, and you worked with other cool people in your department, so like we were all mutually friendly to each other, and I think it was cool then. But it seems like after we departed that company, then like we kind of connected more
Yeah. Oh,
if I'm
definitely.
recalling correctly. And then I realized much later on that you were just a big old nerd like I am, and we were into a lot of the same stuff. You're a writer. I'm trying to be a writer. And
I
just
think
we
you're a
kind of
writer. I mean,
well,
you're a writer. You can own that.
I'll have to. I feel like to be a writer, I have to have written something, completed something, and you've completed many things. So I'm like, well, I'm almost there. I'm getting closer. I feel like I'm in the George R. R. Martin camp of like, it just takes me a while. So I can
Yeah.
sympathize with that guy pretty closely. Um, but anyway, yeah. So I moved to Denver, and you moved
I moved to
to.
Orange County, California.
That's right. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then we just one thing led to another. And we had a series of conversations, I guess, last year, and the last every time I've been in Nashville, we try to meet up, and like
Yeah.
every time we meet up, it's like these 2 hour long like, have you seen this? Have you seen this? What is this? And then we're like, we should record this, and then sooner or later, you wrote an amazing blog post as we talked about last time about Avengers: Age of Ultron.
Please.
Actually, no, I always think you came first. I provoked
You provoked it. Yes.
I provoked it, and you're like, wait till you read this, and I read this. I'm like, dude, we need to let's just record this stuff right now. So,
Yeah. I was down with that. That was such a good idea.
and your geek cred runs probably deeper than mine. Like I came from the 1980s. As a child of the 80s, like my introduction to all of this stuff was He-Man. So I was obsessed with the cartoon. I was obsessed with the toys. The toys came with little comics. That was my first introduction to comics. And I'm a diehard fan of the original 1987 Dolph Lundgren movie. As much as people are like, that wasn't He-Man, I'll say this much: the two things from a He-Man movie that I don't care what else happens, the two things that have to happen are He-Man has to hold his sword up above his head and say, I have the power, and Skeletor has to be badass. And that movie has both of those things in spades. Like Frank Langella as Skeletor, even as a little like 6-year-old kid, I'm like, oh my god, like it blew me away. And then to find out later on that was one of Frank Langella's favorite roles he ever played. We're talking about like an Oscar-winning, or nominated at least, actor, celebrated actor of Frank Langella. And they're like, what was your favorite role? Was it when you played Nixon? Was it when you played, He's like, no, Skeletor. And I'm like, oh my god, that just made me cry almost a little bit. I teared up a little bit when I saw that. And so to know that was the case, they're gonna remake it, and I'm sure it'll be amazing. But I'm like, I still look at that movie as like my like first big like that was, and then other things too, like Back to the Future and all that
Sure.
cool stuff from
Well,
the 80s that came out.
firstly, I was completely unaware that there was a He-Man movie.
What? How have you never? Oh,
I-
oh,
But secondly,
oh.
it's so interesting to me that um, we both got, our exposure to comic books came from toys,
Yeah.
and mine was from G.I. Joe. And
Oh, you were a Joe kid.
one of the
Okay.
first comic books I ever picked up, if not the first, on my own was G.I. Joe number 10. I specifically remember that.
Mhm.
And I remember what happens. Pretty sure it's Scarlet and Clutch, and they're in this fake town that someone's built, and they're being poisoned in this prison cell and hallucinating from it. It was wild
God.
that I read that. And then it's only been in the past couple of years that I've read interviews with the creators of that comic book where they acknowledged, well, we invented the comic book in order to sell the toy. Which, as a
Ah.
kid, like I sort of thought I sort of thought everything went in the reverse. You come up with the story, like there's a movie and then they make a toy, and then obviously that it was kind of the peek behind the curtain that
Yeah. Yeah.
oh, I've been manipulated my whole life. But then
Yeah.
then I read a lot when I was in that age of 10 to 14 or something. I read a lot of comics, and then put them away for a while and only picked up the occasional one. And I don't know, 8, 9 years ago, I got into them again earnestly. And
Mhm.
so when after we recorded episode 0 last week, we after you had hit stop on the on the recording, you continued to tell me about how you had just gotten into comics
Yeah.
as an adult, and it dovetailed so nicely with how I got back into them. So
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
thought,
Yeah.
let's just do an entire episode that talks about um, comics,
Yeah.
and so that's what
Yeah.
we're doing right now. So
Exactly. Well, and it's good too because you and I both seem to be sort of in that sweet spot of being Image fans. Um,
yes,
and I mentioned it a little bit on last time, but my foray into comics, I was never a big comic kid. I was always sort of like loosely interested in it. Everyone, I'd stop at the grocery store and there'd be like the rack, and I'd see like, an alternate Batman sort of cover, like a Elseworlds cover, and be like, "What's Batman dies? What?" Like, and just not understanding what was going on at all. My only sort of exposure to him were those little He-Man comics, and it was cool. And that was actually, it's funny that you mentioned that you sort of had this purist view of comics as a kid, and it was only later on that you're like, oh, they were meant to sell the toy. Whereas He-Man, like, unabashedly was like, oh, no, this is corporate synergy at its finest, and we're teaching it to you now, kid. It's like the comic, stories in the comics would introduce a toy that would then be reinforced on the show, or vice versa. So like, if a character appeared on the show, you're like, he better goddamn well come out as a toy like next week, 'cause I
right,
need
right.
to add that toy to my playing, sort of scheme that I had set up. But I was just never really, for whatever reason, and this is going to probably, I can already hear the gasps of people as I say this next thing. I was just never really into the superhero comic thing. I thought it was, I know, at the time, because I was just like, well, there just seemed to be too much. I'm like, where do you start? As when I kind of started, it was almost like a carnival ride that was going too fast, and every time I tried to jump on, like I just got disoriented and had to jump off again, or it kicked me off, because I'm like, I don't, what, this has been going on for a while. Is there a start or an end? Like what? And there was nobody living in Wall, South Dakota. There was nobody to go, hey, let me explain to you how this works. There's no internet, so I couldn't like go on Google and go like, what's what's the deal here? Where do I jump in? Where do I fit in? And so I just was kind of like, maybe. And it was only very recently, in the last 5 or 6 years, when I saw the movie for The Watchmen, and unlike a lot of people, I was like, what is this? This is amazing. And immediately went and got the graphic novel, because I'm like, I want to see how close it is. I want to see how it's different. And everybody was talking up the Watchmen graphic novel as like one of the pinnacles of the format. So I'm like, well, I need to understand why that is. I was just intrigued. I was incredibly intrigued. And then I became a fan of Alan Moore. I'm like, what else has he done? Oh, he's done V for Vendetta too. Oh my God, all these things. And that kind of put me on this path to like comics and the graphic novel format, but to want to find those stories that sort of go a different way with it, kind of are not what you would normally expect. And that led me to Image, the label that's all creator owned. I was kind of referred to it as the Green Bay Packers of the comic world, because it's creator owned. It's got a very, very loyal kind of fierce following. And I've noticed too, like, Free Comic Book Day was, 2-3 weeks ago, and I've noticed the people who are Image fans are like they are like dyed in the wool Image fans. And that might be the same for DC or Marvel, but I will interact with other Image fans, and it's like all they read is image stuff, and I'm kind of in that same boat right now. And I know you're not exclusively Image, but you're definitely, like, we were comparing our lists, and I'm like, here's what I'm reading right now, and you're like, here's what I'm reading right now, and it was all Image stuff. So I was
Yeah,
like, oh, and it's crazy too, because the stuff you're reading, I am not, and vice
right.
versa.
Yeah, it's I mean, first of all, that business setup of being creator owned it seems to be a great model for them to use. And
Yeah.
I can't speak really intelligently about how they've done it, but I know that I follow John Layman and Rob Guillory, who write and draw the comic I read called Chew.
Mm.
And I know on Twitter they've made mention at least of that their responsibility is to make the comic and sell it, and if it doesn't
Yeah.
sell, then they don't have a job. It's sort of like the opposite of Batman, where the title's going to continue whether
Yeah. Yeah.
that
Yeah.
writer's on it or not. um,
This is the
and
one where Batman poops his pants. It's like, oh,
yeah,
well,
yeah,
and then
like
it's like, well, let's do another one next week. No one bought
right.
that one.
Yeah, so it's I just I don't know. It kind of raises the stakes a little bit, but it also makes sure that you're getting something that the artist and the writer want to give you.
Yeah.
And it's, they're never having to compromise because of the arc of the universe's story or something like
Well,
that. So
here's what it is. Here's what it is for me. So the thing it's not all the image titles, but it's a good chunk of them. There's no ads. Um, So it's you can
right.
read it start to finish, and if there are ads, a lot of times they are built around the story. So they're fake ads for something in the universe of the story, which I think is really cool. And then more often than not, I know Dark Horse does this a little bit too, but Image seems to be very focused around the design of the book. So the covers are very graphic design intense, or there's some kind of angle around the presentation and packaging. And like Jonathan Hickman, who we'll get into, is one of those guys. And there's just the Wicked and the Divine, like all those books. There's just a very considered sort of look to them that I really that even if the writing is crap, like I'll immediately get sort of interested in that just because they're like, this is something that we're intentionally considering start to finish, you know.
Yeah, well, I think that's part of that same thing of when you get into an Image title, you're getting into the world of that one single
Yeah.
title, and that goes from the packaging of the single issue or the trade paperback all the way to the story. It's like from the outside in, you're getting that nice capsule of it.
Yeah.
So,
Well, let's talk about because one of the things we clicked on not too long ago when we were talking about this was just our preference on comic art. And this kind of goes
yeah,
back to my sort of late entry into the game too, because I just, for whatever reason, didn't gel with a lot of the way comics were drawn in the 80s and 90s, and largely because my scope was kind of very narrow. I didn't, wasn't aware of a lot more than just what I was seeing on newsstands and racks and that kind of thing.
He-Man, yeah.
He-Man too, yeah, and that was sort of like, well, must be it. But it seems like even if the story is really good, it feels like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it feels like you and I are in the same boat of, if it's drawn in a way that's not appealing to us, we just can't get into it. It's like I can't read a story for the story's sake if the art is not complementary to it or is not in my sort of wheelhouse of what I like.
I will pick up a book with art I like, uh, and be into it. But even if the writing is not that great,
Yeah,
but if the art is not good, I won't even pick up the book.
bingo. Yep.
And I have the worst example of that, which is something you and I have talked privately about, which is V for Vendetta,
Ah,
which
yes.
is this legendary, series that's collected as a trade paperback these days. But as far as I understand, that story was Alan Moore actually had to work with several different writers, or sorry, he was several different artists,
Mm-hmm.
and it just suffers. It's
Yeah.
like I just can't. I can't get into it, and I hate it. I've tried to read it so many times, and my eyes just kind of like blur over because I'm looking at
Yeah.
this art that I hate, and then I put it down, and it's just awful that I feel that way.
Well, it is too bad because you feel like, what's wrong with me? Because everybody's like, oh, this is one of the legendary titles. You're like, yeah, and the movie was, I thought, pretty good. So and I understand the graphic novel is different, in kind of the details. But yeah, you look at, they pack so much into a page, and it's very tiny art. It's very hard to kind of see what's going on, and I would say there's a lot of similarity between V for Vendetta and Dark Knight Returns in that, and I understand Dark Knight Returns as a story is amazing. Like if you go watch the animated version of it, oh my god! But the graphic novel version of it, like I just can't deal with Frank Miller's drawing style in that particular book very easily. Like I've tried a few times, and I kind of have to suffer through it because I'm like, oh, and it's only when he gets to big splash pages that I'm like, okay, I dig this. But it's the small, it's got a lot of those like very small cells trying to pack in a lot of stuff on a page, and it's just not my particular cup of tea.
Well,
So
I mean,
okay.
I'll defend that one like to the end because that's, and we spoke about this in the last episode. I came to it as an adult. I can't really speak about the history of what was going on at the time when it came out,
Mm-hmm.
even though I do remember it when I was a kid. It was just the creepy Batman that I didn't want to read. But it
Creepy Batman.
as far as I understand now, it's I mean, he just tore apart the way that you write and illustrate a comic book
Yeah,
and
yeah.
made it so, and it's it's especially it's especially incredible, I guess, when you look at I'm always taken aback by how um, uh, his Miller's work on like Daredevil, for example, was great, but
Hmm.
it also fit within what you had seen in other comic books, you
Yeah,
know. Whereas
yeah,
Dark Knight was definitely like this really big statement of this is not going to look like anything you've ever seen, and it's not.
yeah.
But you know, and it's not the same story that you've ever read. So I can see how it's difficult to get into because again, you talk about when you're as an adult and you want to check out some comic books, it's kind of hard to go, well, what am I going to like? I mean, you don't really know what can I get into? How do I jump into the middle of the stream on all these stories?
Yeah, yeah.
Dark Knight Returns is one of those big ones that is inevitably going to come up. Somebody's going to say, "Have you read it?"
Oh, yeah.
And
Well, do you know what helped? Do you know what helped me honestly get my appreciation of the book, the graphic novel, went up when I got it as a digital version, because I don't know if you've tried this on the iPad yet, but a lot of these digital versions let you basically the cell that you're on. It's almost like a shadow box where it's enlarged and there's a darker kind of thing around the rest of it. So you can focus more on each individual cell and not kind of be distracted by the rest of it. And for me, that made it a much more pleasing experience because then it's even though I'm not entirely a fan of the art, I could at least go through it almost more cinematically that way, and you can kind of control the pacing. And I understand like that, the way it's laid out on the page, especially in the kind of that late 80s era when everybody was experimenting with the format a lot more. That was, the way your eyes go down the page and the way the page transitions physically is important to it. But that did help me a lot. And so if anybody's out there going, oh, I'm kind of with you. I don't really understand. I don't get it as much. Try the digital version if that is the case, because that does seem to make a difference, at least for me.
all the purists, if
Oh, I know.
there are any who would have ever would ever be
They're
listening
tweeting
to
the shit out
this
of me right
are
now. That's why I didn't reveal my Twitter handle last time. Like, we're gonna wait until I've gotten all my dumb crap out of me and out in the open, and then people be, oh, that's just how he is. That's why you're here. See, if it was just me rambling on and on, like people would be like, okay, but see, you bring the legitimacy, the credibility to
you're just setting me up for a terrible fall
our
at some point.
endeavor.
That's what's happening. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we should circle back to that at the end of this.
Yeah.
Um, maybe about those books that got us into stuff. You know?
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's do this. We're kind of. I know I'm sort of breaking our. We had a format for the show a little bit, but we kind of keep segueing nicely into different things. Um, in terms of Act 2 of our little show, let's just go back and forth, and each of us talk about, and let's try to do them in order. Starting with our favorite thing we're reading, and we'll each take a turn, and let's talk about what and we'll just go until I've got a big old stack sitting next to me, so I'm not going to go through all of them, but let's just
Are
go.
we saying it's exclusively Image at this point?
It doesn't matter. I just say
Okay.
whatever you're reading right now that you're super excited about. And
Okay.
a lot of mine are going to be, in fact, all of mine except for one thing are going to be Image. So that's just kind of the theme of my thing. But whatever you're reading now that you're excited about, and let's just take a turn
Okay.
and talk about what it is, why you like it, where you were, the circumstances, and all that good stuff. And I'll let you go
Okay.
first.
No, I think you should go first because you actually have a longer list.
Well,
And
well, that's
plus, I want you to start with East of West
yeah, yeah,
because
yeah.
we talked
Well,
about that after the episode the other day, and I was so intrigued, and I'm definitely going to go in and read it now. So,
reason I have so much stuff on my list is I took a vacation a month ago and I went to Portland. I don't know if you've been to Portland lately, but you type in comic book shop in Google Maps and you will find a amazing treasure trove of stores and shops that I have never seen anywhere else. I mean, every city's got their shop that's cool, but Portland's got like 7 of them. And
I've never been to Portland.
oh my god! And I went, and they're all different. Like one I went into was like a very very clean, wooden floor, very well curated. It was almost like a museum. It was very good selection, but they were very specific about what they were featuring. Just a really cool experience. Another one I went to was like somebody's hoarder's house, like a dude who's had the shop for 35 years, and you walk down there, and I'm not even kidding, floor to ceiling, just stacked with books and stacked with books. You didn't even see the guy sitting behind the counter because he was hidden by all this inventory they had everywhere. But you walk up there, and you're like, I don't even know how to begin to to explore your story. He's like, well, start with this stack right here, and he pointed to a stack sitting right beside him, and it was like every single thing in that stack was amazing, and I'm like, oh my god, dude! And then I walked out of there with like 3 or 4 things. I was just like, god damn it! I came back from vacation with like half my bag filled with stuff. So that's probably part of the problem. But yeah, my sort of image. It's interesting that we start with East of West, because my sort of image fandom begins with Jonathan Hickman. And I was over Christmas just in a comic book shop back home in Rapid City, South Dakota, and I walked in and there was the East of West sort of annual special issue that was a world building issue. I had never heard of the series. I'd never heard of Jonathan Hickman. I'm still kind of treading water, trying to figure out what I do like, don't like. I knew of Image, I knew kind of the different things that were out there. I hadn't really picked up any copies yet. So I grabbed this annual, I started reading it. I'm like, this is incredibly intriguing. Went back and got the first trade paperback. Volume 1 was super hooked. Volume 2, Volume 3, Volume 4 is coming out soon. So East of West, the premise is everything you know about American history is and then just world history is correct up until the Civil War. And during the Civil War, an asteroid hits what's I guess, as far as I can understand, it's about somewhere in Missouri. It hits in Missouri, and kind of changes the course of the Obviously, the Civil War doesn't end like it did. It kind of ends in a stalemate. At that time, a preacher from the South starts writing this prophecy, and at the same time, an Indian chief writes the same prophecy, and eventually Mao Zedong writes the same prophecy, but they're all writing a different part of it. And at the same exact time, they all die, or at least two of them die at the same time. And then Mao, I think, finishes all independent of each other. They don't know each other as writing this, and then all 3 versions get brought together to become the actual prophecy that depicts the end of the world. Imagine then, at the same time, the Civil War ends in a stalemate. The South becomes its own sort of country. The what's left of the Union stays the Union. Texas becomes the Republic of Texas. The free slaves kind of reconstitute a new nation around the Kingdom of New Orleans. China invades the West Coast and sets up the People's Republic of America. And then probably my favorite twist, Red Cloud does what Genghis Khan did and unites by conquest or by treaty all of the American Indian tribes into one single endless nation. And all of those, that they basically they signed this accord at the site of the asteroid, or the meteorite crash, which is now called Armistice, and that's America now. It's this subdivided thing. That's the stage that we're set on. The whole graphic novel itself starts with the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse coming back, right? And they come back as children, and one of them's missing. So I think it's death, pestilence, and I forget what the other one is.
Famine.
Famine. Thank you. Yeah, and death is not with. I'm sorry, death is not with him. It's war, famine, pestilence, and death is missing. And you come to find out that death didn't. At some point, they all died. Along the last time they were here, they died, but death didn't die with them or didn't go back with them. So he's been wandering around this whole time. And he looks like, kind of this cool version of Sawyer from Lost and Clint Eastwood sort of combined. In fact, if they make this as a TV series, they better goddamn cast that guy who played Sawyer, because I keep seeing him as his character. But these the other 3 horsemen of the apocalypse come back, and they're like, he's not here. And so they go hunting him, and then the whole story is, how do they help bring about the end of the world? How does death stop them? How do these different factions of what is now North America, how do they sort of help bring this about? It's super compelling, and there's like a really crazy sort of mystic sci-fi element that comes into play that's just bananas. The really cool thing that, and it's kind of a sort of a spoiler, the really cool thing that I noticed was the Endless Nation becomes the most technically savvy I guess country. I don't want to keep calling it a country, but territory, if you will. They at one point, because all the American Indian tribes are now one. At one point, they all collectively decide to abandon spiritualism and all of their kind of traditions for logic and reason. So they become basically Apple as a society. And there are a couple, there's a couple of shaman and medicine men who are very resistant to that and kind of and almost double down in the spiritualism of aspect of things. And so they even gain the ability to like summon demons and all this kind of crazy shit. But the regular Endless Nation become like the most technically advanced. So all of their their devices, their computers, all that stuff is what they export to the rest of the country. So it's super interesting to see like what would have happened, obviously in an imaginary universe if these things had come to pass. There's a realism there that I really like and kind of a really cool what if. But the art, going back to the art, is amazing. Jonathan Hickman has a very it's like his graphic novel sort of background, or his graphic design background is coming, is full force here. There's a lot of pages. His transitions are just like clean white pages with, light gray text that have either a quote from the prophecy or just his own sort of comments on things. The colors are just gorgeous. I fell in love with this freaking series, and I can't wait to see Volume 4. I've been holding off reading individual issues.
So does Hickman do the art and write the stories?
No, it's Hickman is the writer, and he designs the books. So he designs the transitions and just sort of the layout, and then Dragata and Martin do the actual art. I think they take turns, or I forget who does. Let me just see here. Oh, Frank Martin's the colors, and Nick Dragata is the actual artist. And Jonathan Hickman's the writer, and he designed a lot of what you'll see in other Hickman books in terms of just the sort of the fonts and the stylized look of the package is definitely here too.
Cool.
But I'm a huge and again this is as of Christmas. I didn't even know this thing existed, and now I'm like, I want to see the series made so bad. And there's a twist that I don't want to. There's a really cool twist that comes along about halfway through that I will not reveal if you want to get into it. That's very worth it. And you're like, oh my! It kind of blows apart what you think was going to happen, and then you're sort of rooting for a character you never thought you would root for, which is awesome. So
yeah, definitely no spoilers.
No.
Just when you said that, I thought maybe that's what we should call this show. No spoilers, man.
It's too tempting. I'm gonna as soon as we say that, I'm gonna like let slip something. I'll be like, oh damn it. I'll be like, that's yeah.
Well, that description of East of West is like that leads so perfectly into what I would say about Chew, which is one of my favorite books, which is another Image title, and it has that same, it's a familiar universe, but it is completely invented. It's definitely like an alternate history of present day America. Where the main character is Tony Chu. He is at one point like a police detective, vice cop, and then he joins the FDA. I believe that's correct. But there's so many government agencies in this that it's hard to keep track of them. But
who wrote it?
So that I had mentioned them earlier. That's John Layman and Rob Guillory. And,
okay.
They have a cool collaborative art. That as I understand it, Layman writes it, but then he also letters it, which is I don't know. I like that about the books, that they're it's definitely a collaborative effort, and they pack so many visual puns and things into those, and little posters in the background and Easter eggs and stuff like that. That it's just amazing to look at, and the art is so crazy different from any kind of superhero book, which is another thing that really appeals to me. In fact, I think a couple of the books on my list at least reflect that. And I should also say that this has such a great origin story for me coming to like it, because the comic book shop that is like quote my local in Orange County is Comics Unlimited in Huntington Beach, and there's two women who work there, and with one of them, I agree with on like everything, comic book wise. And the other one, often like I'll ask for recommendations, and this is such a case where she'll suggest something like, and her name's Denise, and she'll suggest something like, oh yeah, check out the new Nightwing or whatever, and I'm like, Nightwing? I don't have a crush on Dick Grayson. I don't need to see this.
Yeah.
So I generally don't. I differ with her on opinion, but she is the one that told me to pick up Chew, And I did it just, I grabbed it, I looked at the art, I said, this looks cool. I took the first trade paperback home, read it breathlessly in like one sitting and was back
Nice.
for number two. And so I will admit I am one volume behind, and I have been reading it in trade paperbacks because they also put out the issues, of course, and it would be impossible for me to keep up with that. So
Well, it's hard too, especially if it's been out for a while. If it's not a new series,
yeah,
it's tedious unless they're just super cool and you're just that much into it. It's tedious to go back and collect every individual issue, and try to put pieces together. Like I was thinking about doing that with East to West, but I'm like, oh man, they already have the 3 volumes out. I'll just start with those and
it's
go from
like
there.
it's like Netflixing something too. Like I don't want to sit down and read one issue
Yes, yes.
and then have to wait, a month for the next issue. I love sitting down and reading a volume where
Yep.
there's a thematic kind of arc to it, and at least to the best of my knowledge, that's sort of how people are planning these out. There's a story arc, and that's what gets compiled into the trade paperback, and it's great. And anyway, so let me jump into Chew. This Tony Chu detective has superpowers,
Uh,
which are food related. So you see, it's a pun on his name.
Haha. All right.
He's Chew, CHU, and he chews things. Um, and up until I looked this up today, I was pronouncing what he is as a chibopath. But when I looked it up today, I guess Wikipedia told me it's pronounced Sebopath. So that has rewired my brain now, and I don't I
Now
feel
is
like I'm going
that
to mispronounce everything. But what it means is that
Seapath?
when anything he eats, he senses the entire history of the food. So
Interesting.
except beets. So he has to eat beets because otherwise it will drive him crazy. So
Interesting.
he's uh, add into that world that the FDA has outlawed chicken. Add into that his brother is this famous chef.
Oh my God. So wait.
Uh,
What? How far is what year is this meant to be? Is this far
oh, it's
future,
no, it's present day.
present day, just alternative present day?
Yes, and
What's the condition for outlawing chicken?
I believe there's just a disease that hits, and so he, it's outlawed. He ends up when he ends up joining the FDA by another person who is a SIBOpath. He is, that's how his real talent emerges. Um,
Gotcha.
so not only can they do these kind of, it gets pretty grisly pretty quick
Wait. So okay, it's
because
not.
like
It's not just.
if he eats a piece of chicken, he knows who killed the chicken, and he knows how it was killed and where it was killed and like what part of the world it was in. So
Wow.
immediately you can see where this is going. If he eats a dead body,
Oh, gotcha.
he knows who killed him.
See, you made me
And
think. At first, I was thinking this is like just almost more of a comedy where he's just like, I know where
oh,
this chicken came from. It's like let's go.
it's it
The
is
farmer's into
hilarious
shady
for
shit.
sure. But it's it gets gross right away because I mean
Gotcha.
it's like page 6 where he's got to eat a body or something. But this world with these crazy conspiracy theories and this hilarious interaction of like all these government agencies that are in cahoots with each other and fighting vampires and sebopaths and so you keep
Wow.
getting introduced to people with food related powers. Everything is food related. And I won't even
Interesting.
try to pronounce the ones that there's a great directory of them all on Wikipedia. So you can figure out what every power means,
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
kind of the index of everything. And it's just hysterical. And add to that this crazy art that looks like nothing you'd ever see in a superhero book.
Uh,
And it's just awesome. I love it. And yeah, that would be my first recommendation.
excellent. Yeah,
Chew is amazing,
I
and I
keep
believe
passing it.
they're wrapping up.
Oh, really? That's gonna be
I'm
like.
not exactly sure how many more uh, trade paperbacks there will be like in total, but they have said they are going to end with issue 60.
Gotcha.
So yeah,
See,
it
and I
is.
like that. I like that. It's interesting you brought up the Netflix analogy before too, because it's probably there's going to be a lot of people who are probably out there who are like fucking duh. Of course it's like a it's it was always like this, where it's like a series that you, and the trade paperbacks are almost like seasons that you can binge, and you can get 3 or 4 trade paperbacks at the same time and just binge them all. And I feel like that Netflix and just kind of the model of content and entertainment is following in this case, not the other way around necessarily, but there's some our series is going to very much like the British model, where it's like we're going to do three thing, and then I like that. I like things the arc between or nays, like that's the industry's ability. And truth be told, I'm actually think and then the print comes. I like something that's different, and that unlike issue, we're done and then it's done. And then those writers are artists other series and start something new, just like a showrunner would be.
Well, and just like everything on in it, on the Image imprint, and
Yeah,
I think that
yeah,
makes it so accessible. I mean, I think that because finish the world and like the
yeah,
umpteenth issue
yeah.
of Batman. I mean,
Well,
if you pick
it's
up
almost like
what now and you're not
you
into
don't
it,
like what you're
where do you
currently
start?
reading.
It
At
gets a
either
little
some
like
point
daunting to
prior
figure out where to
or
get
at
into
some point
it.
in the
So.
future, there's gonna the one I like. So just wait around and you're gonna find one that's that will be your version. Everyone can be happy and starts and chunk of thing. And it's funny too. I like it when you say that's exactly what I did with which is the at this because everybody's obviously Walking Dead, which is a big series, but also they're talking about I think series tension or it didn't exist. Wicked in the and this one comic shop with the guy that just had the I was like and the play off read the back and I'm like I'm in here. Loved they're hating now. It's happening. The idea is these 12 gods from mythology. They kind of mix, some of them are just different cultures. All of them come back and they take and in today now they're public. Everybody knows who they are. They're all a lot of them are pop stars, so they they perform live. They use their godlike powers, get devotees to follow them and create fans and
So
no.
wait.
Well, sort of
So
so Lucifer is
so
actually
Apollo doesn't come back
they
as
call her
Apollo. He comes
Lucy,
back
but she
as
is knows
Justin
that she looks like
Bieber.
yeah, but she looks like David Bowie, and she walks around like that, and then like one of the gods is like a
Right.
Daft
Like, and the
Punk looking
public knows
DJ,
that it's Lucifer.
and everybody knows
Yeah.
who, but everybody knows these are gods that have powers, and everybody knows that they're gonna die in 2 years. So like the public knows the drill. So it's kind of cool because it drops you into this world where everybody's aware of this and they've got their fan bases and everything, but a lot of the public has kind of gotten bored with it already, and they're just like, they moved on to the next thing, and everybody just kind of treats them like normal people. And there's a reporter trying to get questions, write a story about them and everything. But the one main character, kind of your avatar as a reader into this world, is this girl who's like a super fan, right? She goes to all the shows. She's obsessed with all of them. She wants to be one of them. She ends up meeting Lucifer in the very beginning, and Lucifer is actually framed for a murder that looks very obviously like she committed, but she didn't. And so the first volume kind of walks you through that. It kind of introduces you slowly to the other pantheon. You kind of see what their problems are, and it's weird. It's crazy cool because they're all aware that they're going to die in 2 years, and you get to see that sort of like what do they do with their lives in the meantime? How do they try to make the world better? And they're constantly kind of telling you like some of them are rebels or rogues and they do their own thing, but a lot of them are just like, hey, we're not here. We don't want to tell you what to do. We want to inspire you to do the right things or be the best people you can be. That's all we can ask for. And that's why we're here. We're not trying to control you or lord over you. Like we're just trying to we're trying to influence you to be like to kind of be on a path that we feel is better. So there's kind of a cool, almost benign aspect to them that's interesting. What really hooked me after the back description, the very first sort of scene that you're set with, it shows you the last time they were here, like in the 1920s, and they're sitting around a table, and there's only 4 of them left, and all the ones that have died, you see their skulls sitting in the around the table too, in like these empty chairs. So there's just 4 of them left, and they're all like kind of looking at each other, and you could tell something really shitty went down, and then they're all looking at each other like, well, I guess this is goodbye, and they there's this kind of this mechanism that they do when they snap their fingers and they physically show them snapping their fingers. That's usually a manifestation of their power. So they're all sitting around the table, and the first time they all look at each other and they all go 1, 2, 3, and they all snap and they commit suicide, and the whole house that they're in blows up. It's this crazy. You're like, what? And then they come back 90 years from there. So it really kind of starts right away. It builds that. It sucks you in and builds that kind of intrigue that I love, but have a really hard time trying to write myself for whatever reason. And I don't know. It was really, it sucked me in. The art is really good. The way they sort of stylize the different gods is really cool. Like the other Image titles I like, there's a really heavy sort of design element to the transitions. I don't know. It's just super cool. And again, IO9 really did a nice big puff piece on it that was I thought was accurate. So definitely check that out. It's in fact, the author, I should know this by now. Kieran Gillen wrote it, and then Jamie McClevin and Matthew Wilson designed, or were the artist and designer. There's some other people involved in too. I guess these guys have done other stuff for Marvel too, and other publishers and other titles at some point too, which I will probably discover sooner or later. Yes.
Well, cool. You mentioned the other comic that that would have been my second pick as we go down in order of this, which is Saga, which is another one like Chew where words fail me to describe how amazing this is. Also, not superhero based, also with really unique art. This one is done by Fiona Staples. Brian Vaughan writes it. Brian K. Vaughan writes it. And it is a sci-fi action drama is how I would describe it. It's not goofy in any way like Chew, or it's not humorous in that way. Although there's plenty of humor in it, but it concerns these two aliens from the planet Landfall and its moon Wreath, and I forget which man or woman comes from which, but some of these aliens, from one of those planets have wings, and the others have horns and have magic, and it's just. I heard Vaughn interviewed about it, and he talked about how he was just throwing like any idea that he had into this. So there's really, kind of seemingly like contemporary nods to cell phone batteries dying or something like that. But it's also, it's like action. This planet and its moon are at war. These people come from the opposite sides of that, and they fall in love, and they have a child, and they there's this great pacifist streak running through it, which I love. There's a whole story arc where they meet this author.
Because my biggest confusion is that it's I keep thinking
again,
by the look of it,
they both read this book by this
on
author,
Earth, but you're saying it's
Alana and
completely
Marco
sci-fi.
have, and
Okay.
Yes. But fantasy is a good word for it because it does have those elements of magic, and there'll be a ghost in it and stuff like that, which I think is part of what got me into it was that interview that I had read or heard with Vaughn where he talked about throwing all those influences into it, and it's just such a great collection of all those ideas. Where there's spaceships. They're at one point they're in
very much a Pan's,
spaceship
when I flipped through it, there's
basically
very
a big
much a Pan's
tree,
Labyrinth kind of
and
look to a lot
it's
of
kind
it,
of like
just
its
in the short sort of
fuel source is sort of
and I don't know if that's intentional or not.
magical
but
or something.
that was intriguing
and,
too.
It's
just that sort of stylized, those fantasy-looking characters that you're sort of used to seeing, but in this kind of interesting thing. I hate to interrupt you, but there's one other big question I had. What is the deal with the kid? Because they have this, I feel like this kid, every time I see a cover or I flip through something, it feels like they have this kid. Is that a big good chunk of the arc, or is that something that's only just now starting? Oh, wow. Oh, interesting.
That's a great question, and I wish I had thought to get into it that way because actually the child is the narrator of the whole thing.
Mm.
Um, but it's done in a style that I see a lot in DC comics where there's not exactly
Oh, cool.
there's a narration bubble, not a thought bubble or something on different panels that will say, well, this isn't how my parents first met or whatever, and so you realize pretty quickly
Now, when you
that
say graphically,
the
you're talking
baby
like a
who
gross
very
alien birth where
graphically
you're
is
seeing
born
everything, or like
at the very
are we talking
beginning
about
of the
consummation
series
or all of the
um,
above?
is uh, is narrating the entire thing.
Gotcha.
Um, yeah, I think it just starts with the birth, but then much later you'll
Nice.
probably see some consummation. I mean, it's definitely, not for kids, which I is another thing I really appreciate. Like it's written for adults, and I know sometimes you feel like when you're reading other comic books, there's the tone. There's a different tone that you see, which is like, oh, is this written for a younger audience or is it written for me? And this is definitely written for me. And it's just got so many crazy sci-fi elements, um, and I also love how the characters are so physically unique. And I think that's that fantasy thing you're picking
Mm.
up on, where um, they look completely different. There's a creature that looks sort of like a spider with a woman's body on top of it, or there's a creature that looks like a little seal with little hands and feet or whatever, and um,
Nice.
it's just the different races are depicted as so physically separate, and it's I don't know, it's just fantastic to read. But again,
Yeah.
I mainline this thing. I buy a trade paperback of it, and I read it in
Ah.
2 hours or
Yeah.
something, because I just can't get enough of it,
Yeah,
and
isn't that the worst? Isn't
very
that the
hard to put
worst
the
feeling
brakes
ever?
on
You're like,
that.
I love this, and
Which
you're
I don't
like,
know if
and then
that
it's
makes it
worse with comics because
better
you're
or
like,
worse, because I
some a
love
lot of
the
them are like
binge of
every
it,
month,
but then I have
or
to wait
if
even
that, you're like
longer
maybe
for
every
the
two
next
months, and
fix
you're like,
because
which
yeah,
is I don't know, it's especially if you're in a series where there have been trade paperbacks, and then now you're relegated to,
yeah,
which is what East of West is for me now, because you're relegated to sort of
yeah.
the single issue episodes. But at the same time too, you're like you that anticipation can build, and you can kind of devour the story a little slower that way too. And I don't know, it seems to. Hey, how many volumes has Saga been out? Okay.
There are four right now, which translates to 24 issues or something like that. Like I think there's 6 issues in each.
Nice. Oh,
God, I hope I'm right
September's
about
a
that.
long
I
ways
think there's
away
six
though.
issues in every
Oof.
volume. So, but they've put a date on the next volume, so we know that's coming in September. Yeah, I know, and I held on to actually I held off on buying volume 4 for a long time,
Yep. Yep.
because it came out in December and I only got it in like March or something, and then I waited and I waited to read it, and then I sat down and read the whole thing in like 2 hours.
Wow.
And in
Yeah.
fact,
Yeah.
I believe I
Read
read
it
it on like a
again.
long car trip, and and I was done, like in between bathroom stops. It's like, what am I going to do now? So it'd be great if you have
See,
not
that's
read
where
it,
and I'm
because you can
always
just get in
the collector in
and
me
go
is always
through
looking for that kind of stuff too, where it's like, what can I,
4 volumes. In
especially if
fact,
it's a
they have a
story I
really
really
nice
like,
hardbound
what's
edition,
what's the
which is the
big
first three
cool like
volumes together.
collectible version of this
So
thing that I can get into. That's why I'm like I'm always the idea of an omnibus is always interesting to me, but a lot of times a series has to be well finished, and then and then some before they do that. So you
exactly.
kind of have to.
Well, and another benefit of that I love about the Image comics and their trade paperbacks, especially, is that um, they're inclusive of the whole story. Which, if you
Gotcha.
don't know, when you pick up like a trade paperback from DC or Marvel, often they want to they want to keep the story together, so they might just
Yeah.
pull a whole
Yeah.
issue out, which sort of
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
I don't know how that, but like that just bothers me. If there's if I'm buying a trade paperback, I want it to be issues one
Yeah.
through
Yeah.
six. I don't
Well,
want it to be like issues 2, 4, 5, and 6. I want I want it to be the collection of everything, even if one of them kind of went off the rails or
Well,
something.
on that note,
So, but the reason for
perfect
that is that
transition.
these,
I'm gonna use
image
my next
creator-owned
pick
comics, they're not going
is
off the rails.
exactly
Like they're
that.
telling the
It's
story they
another
want to
Jonathan
tell,
Hickman
and
piece. It's called
so
Nightly
you're getting
News.
it all. So
And this one I did get in Portland, and this is the 10th anniversary hardcover version of the Nightly News. And it was sitting up on their shelf. It was on their featured shelf, and I saw Hickman's name. I'm like, well, I'm a Hickman fan already. Let me just see what this is. Grabbed it and started flipping through it. It's his very first series. It's like a 3 or 4 book series, but it's meant to be it's meant to be read in the collected format. But talk about being just blown away. This is a book that combines kind of everything that he's known for. The very non-traditional story. This one has no fantasy elements of any kind. It's just a pure kind of crime drama kind of story. It's got his amazing graphic design sort of element. He wrote and drew or designed, and basically was in charge of everything. Parts of this include like actual infographics. The transitions are cool. There's a lot of layered, kind of dirty, kind of graphics going on, like traditional graphic design with, photo referenced drawings of people on top, which I know a lot of people aren't really into the photo reference drawings. They'd rather see kind of pure from scratch drawings. But it doesn't I like it. It doesn't bother me at all. I think if you get the right poses and the right kinds of look, for people, it works well. He's got a lot of the monochrome. The use of color to sort of designate which era you're in. So it really, everything that I know from Hickman that I've kind of come to identify as his signature style, like started with this book. And the best way to describe the story is, imagine Fight Club and the NewsHour kind of combined, and the sort of the setup is this sort of Tyler Durden-esque character is at the top of this building, and he shoots a guy in broad daylight, just snipers him down, and then when the news crews start to arrive to cover the story, he starts taking them out, and you realize he's part of this organization that's led by this nameless, faceless sort of voice, and you keep hearing the voice says, and the voice communicates to them through these cassette tapes that they just send them, and the whole point of this organization is to take out the news infrastructure of America as we know it, and just because it's gotten out of control and it doesn't represent truth anymore. It's very meta and very critical of just what news is and what power is. And so you go through this whole thing, and you find out how these people became part of this organization, where they came in from, what connects them all together, who really the voice is. During the whole thing, they do reveal who the voice is at the very end, but that's not even like, you kind of don't care as much. It's important, but you don't. That's not the central thing driving the story. The central thing driving the story is, who are they going to succeed? Are they actually going to bring down the news system of this country? And it kind of bounces back and forth in time. It does things like, it talks about, there's a big commentary on just the education system, and it does these cool things when it shows you an infograph. So it starts talking about education in America, and he'll flash out this infograph, and on that same infograph will be a little note that says, to find out more about drugging your male children into submission, read below. However, if you're like me and only care about your own personal entertainment, keep reading on the next page. So you don't have to read the infographics, but they reinforce what you're seeing. It's so cool. And then in the edition I have, he has the entire script for issue 1, so you can see exactly how he wrote it. And then he's got like a whole section on just how he designed it, like why he chose the different color palettes he chose, how he chose his reference shots, the reference photos, all the different options he did. So the whole thing is a very sort of considered piece. And I feel like those additional sort of things they included in the hardcover version are important, because then you get the whole sense of what the artistic sort of intent was in the whole piece. You get to see, oh, it's amazing. And so I love your use of the word mainline, because it's exactly what I did. I grabbed this in addition to a couple of other
yeah,
things.
I always love that
and
stuff.
as soon as I opened this thing up, I was done with it. Like an hour and a half later, and I reread it, and dove into the extras, the DVD extras, if you will, and I just, oh my god, if you're a graphic designer, if you're interested in good solid storytelling, if you're interested in comics that are not at all what you would expect. This fits all of those things. Yes, exactly.
And we should clarify, it's not an
Hickman did a
ongoing
lot of that.
series.
His
It is
early
a
stuff was
wrapped
very
up. It
much
was like a
3 and 4
six issue series
issues,
that
just
they
one
published as a
shots. That's
graphic
it.
novel, and
Another one, I won't
it's
get into
done,
this
so
one
you
too
can
much right
get
now, but
into it
another
and
one I
read the
picked
whole
up at the
thing.
same time, also by
Yeah.
Hickman, is called Pax Romana. Same thing, very much a start and finish story. This one is interesting because, like, unlike Nightly News, where he uses infographics as kind of his twist on the genre, in Pax Romana there are entire pages that are just like scripted dialogue. So you'll see like a reference graphic of a couple people sitting around a table talking or whatever, and then you'll just see their conversation play out as just white pages with script and no drawings per se. So there's very much both of these, Pax Romana and Nightly News, you can easily see how these would translate to TV shows or movies immediately. It's like there's just the way they're set up, the pacing of them, even the way they're the issues within the collected version kind of lay out are very much episodes.
Yeah.
It's just so. This kind of really cemented my my fanboy love of John Hickman, because I'm just like, if this is what he is, I'll pick up anything he does from this point on. And this was his very first thing, Nightly News. What's on your list? What else you got?
Awesome.
Yeah.
Man. Yeah.
Absolutely.
What I was going to suggest was because we're running long, so let me tell you what else I'm reading, and then maybe we just button it up and we put all this other stuff in another episode. So I'm gonna
hey man,
diverge from
I'll
the,
suck
the
that
image,
dick as long as they
blowjob
keep
we've
putting out
been
this
giving
good
right
stuff.
here.
And I'm not even wanting.
My
They can
brain
send
was
me
trying to
free
come up
stuff
with
if they want
something
but
nicer to say.
I'm not even anticipating
that
that.
works.
I fell into this wormhole like 2 or 3 months ago, and the fact that everything I find I'm like I just fall in love with is astounding, and it's.
Well, I love the idea. I mean, like, what gets me so excited about this
Yeah.
topic specifically is, if you
Oh,
like
sure.
comics, if you
Yeah.
like that kind of pop culture and that art, how do you get into it? Like, where do you start? And that's, I mean, my God, we could do
Mhm.
episodes on that every week because I feel like I kind of made my own map of getting back into comics, when I had lost the story for years. And so, I definitely have a different route
Yeah.
in than you
Yeah.
do, but it's just so intriguing to me. Like, an image apparently is
They're
just this
kind of like
great
if somebody's out there listening
device
who
to get
isn't
into.
into
It's like
comics yet,
just pick an
but
image
does
book whose
love
art you
good,
like and
good
read it.
solid
Like
just
that's
TV.
that's as simple as
Image
it
to
has
me
to
is
be,
kind of
you
like
know?
the comic books world's version of the BBC, because I feel like the BBC or just British creators in general. There's every showrunner, like Broadchurch blew me away, Doctor Who blew me away, like everything that the BBC largely does. I don't know if Broadchurch was BBC, that might have been ITV4, but anyway, a lot of what you see in Image fits that British TV creator, writer creator sort of vibe of very very specific stories told, and over short runs. It's like we're not just going to let this run forever. It's going to be a start and a finish, and we're going to pack a lot of really good nuanced character development into these things and show you something that you probably haven't seen before that then everybody else is going to copy.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, there's definitely something kind of
Yeah.
I wish I had a better adjective for this, but it's kind of un-American, because we think in terms of like a franchise that'll last forever, and um, that's hard to maintain, and it's never gonna,
Oh, I don't know, man. There's
it's
probably
never
somebody
gonna
out there
give you
who's
that
like, "What are you-"
satisfaction.
He's
Like
wearing
no,
his Spider-Man costume right now. Listening,
nobody's
going,
ever gonna
"Hey,
read every Spider-Man
hey."
comic ever and go, that was fantastic. If only someone were listening, that would be great, right? So I didn't plan it this
Ooh,
way, or maybe I did, but diverging from
I
Image,
haven't
I'm
even
going to
heard of
mention
this. What is
what
this?
is possibly in this year my favorite comic book of all times.
Axe Cop,
which is
AXECOP.
Axe Cop. I've given so much press to this thing
Wow, they don't
anyway
bury the
because I
lead at
just
all there.
love it, and I love. Okay, um, yeah, it's a cop with an axe. It
What?
was. Hold on, I'm going to sell you on it right now. Invented by a 5-year-old and drawn by his 29-year-old brother. So, unlike the comics that we've mentioned so much with this, non-superhero uh, art that's, so different and so made just for the issue. I think what one of the strengths of Axe Cop is the stories are so damn weird because they come from this 5-year-old. So the art is definitely uh, it, you know, of the conventional variety of an action comic. So it
Yeah,
is,
yeah, yeah.
there is no, um, I mean, it's like all good comedy is done uh, where the people making the comedy don't know they're in a comedy. Axe Cop has no idea how funny this is. So, um,
What if like
and
what if when he
and
becomes a teenager,
I,
he's
I
like,
think at this
I'm gonna
point,
take Axe Cop in
Malachi,
a dark new
the
direction,
5-year-old
and like
who's
he
now
goes like
11, I
you
believe,
know, he's
I
like
think
this
he's
is my
aware of
art,
how
but it's
funny it
like
is. Like he's a really
just as
funny
I'm
kid,
growing
but
and changing, I feel like Axe Cop needs to experience some life changes too, and then it goes off the rails for a few years. Like what the hell? Yeah,
I, I hope so.
oh
Uh,
wow, he gets into that
his,
even
I
too.
mean, so far, so far, his takes
I'm
on,
looking at it. I'm looking at the
marriage
Google
and
images. There's, I mean, good lord.
dating,
There's
other,
cosplay
other,
everywhere.
very
There's
big events in a human
wow.
life are really hilarious. Um, it's amazing. Oh yeah. So it started as a webcomic. Dark Horse has put out, I think, 5 volumes at this point, um, which are great because they collect the webcomic. They collect this awesome
Wow.
series they've done on the web, which is called Ask Axe Cop, where readers just write in a question, Malachi answers it, and then Ethan draws that answer. So I believe that's the first time Axe Cop gets married. Is someone had it was from
Whoa.
an Ask Axe Cop where someone had asked who he would marry and why, and he explains that it would be Abraham Lincoln, but it would be a woman, Abraham Lincoln, or something like that. It's just
Is it
it's
really?
so
Holy shit.
strange. Um,
Oh my
but
god.
then
How
they,
have I never
it is
heard of
also a
this?
Fox ADHD TV uh, uh, cartoon at this
Oh
point.
Jesus.
And
What?
yes, it is on season 2 of that, and on FXX. And Nick Offerman is the voice of Axe Cop. And it's either a story in one of the introductions to the book, or I heard it personally from Ethan at a Comic Con.
Oh wow.
But
That's
the story is that
awesome.
when when the creator
It
first
was
met
meant
with
to
Nick
be.
Offerman, and Offerman shows up with his volume of Axe Cop that's already like dog-eared and notated. Like he came to it as a fan. So it's just fantastic. The two brothers that make it are absolutely the most lovable people. Like I've met Ethan several times at
Oh,
Comic
that makes
Cons, and
sense.
I've met
Okay.
Malachi, even though he would never remember it. I've written a song about Axe Cop and named a
That's
EP that I
awesome.
put out after Axe Cop, and yeah, they're like undoubtedly like this was one of my favorite things that ever happened to comic books. Yeah, and it's it's just so brilliant. And to me, the other thing that makes it so great, and the reason I can talk about it like with so much, I mean, as much as I love Chew and Saga, like I have to read those and
Oh, that's so
it's
cool. Yeah, yeah.
I don't know. I read them with a different sort of excitement than I read Axe Cop because it makes me experience comics all over again. I guess is what it is. Is thinking of like one of the things that's a note in one of the books is how Ethan, the older brother, was constantly having to sort of you know n- teach Malachi about the nuance of
Yeah.
story. You can't like Axe Cop can't battle a whole planet of bad guys like he does, Bad Guy Planet, and
Yeah,
they
yeah.
just all die because of there has to be some kind of tension or something. But it's so funny that but when you think about it, like yeah, that's what a 5-year-old does. Like that's oh, that's how I played around in my
Yeah, it
backyard when
is.
I was a kid, um, and and I just get that feeling of being a kid and getting into comic books, but it's illustrated so well, and it's just like such it's just so beautiful, and the way that Ethan obviously is kind of structuring these, sort of
Wow.
um, improvisations that he and Malachi do. He's structuring it into the story and really making it like
Well,
a
the one
tight
I'm
story
I'm
with a
I'm
beginning
looking
and
at
an
Google
ending and
Images
an
right
arc, and
now, and I'm seeing them
it's
ride a
it's just so
cyborg
fantastic.
dinosaur.
And
Is
like
that like a
you know,
regular
I
thing, or is that like a one-off
everyone
thing, or what
on the planet should be
is
reading
that
this
part of
book.
it?
It's so great. Oh, oh, sure. That's
I just I,
uh,
I need to check out this
I believe his name
cartoon
is
'cause
Rexy.
just the idea of this guy speaking in Ron
But
Swanson's
yeah, I mean
voice,
that's
like
yeah, that's
it's just like
obviously
that whole thing.
that's their
Oh, it's
T-Rex
like
with
because
machine gun
I mean,
hands.
just as soon as you said Nick Offerman, like in my head, I'm like, of course, that's whose voice. It's like who else would it
Oh my
be?
God, yeah, it's amazing.
That's amazing. They gotta mainline this thing into a film sooner than later while Nick Offerman's still a young guy and he can he can show up on screen. Yeah, and
Yeah,
actually
I
play him in real
of
life. That's
course.
awesome.
Yeah. Actually, I'm sorry.
Wexter. That's better.
Actually play him. Um,
Oh,
yeah, I'm sorry. I have to correct myself because I did look it
so
up. I
get
was
it
like, it's not
right.
Rexy. It's Wexter. Oh my God, wait, is that the dog?
That's
Oh God,
awesome.
sorry, Ethan. Um,
Well, go like if anybody's listening right now, and they're like, "What is this?"
yes,
Go to just
Wexter
go
is the
Google this and
T-Rex
go to the
with
images section
machine
because
gun
this will tell you
arms
everything you need to know.
that
It looks
flies through
amazing.
space
Or
that
that,
Axcop can
yeah.
ride.
Oh, that's awesome.
Just go to axcop.com. Like you can read
I
all of
was
it
about
right
to
there. I mean,
cancel my
it's
Hulu
so
account literally
unbelievable.
this weekend, so I'm gonna
And
keep
I
it.
know that I
Knowing
caught up on
that,
the
I'm gonna keep it
show
around just to check
through
this out.
Hulu,
That's
so
pretty
I'm
awesome.
hoping that the new episodes are on there. I haven't actually checked in the past month, so yeah, it's. I watched the greatest like pair of panels at I must have been at San Diego a couple years
That's
ago,
awesome.
where it was like the Fox ADHD panel first, and then an AXCOP panel after that. And it was
Neat.
just beautiful.
Wow.
They did an improv with cosplayers in the audience, and
Well, it's a cool
Malachi
story too, like
directing
just
them and having
just like the
AXCOP
fact that
fight
these two brothers are
somebody.
so far apart in
It was
age,
just
yet they
it
kind
was
of
just so
collaborated in this
like
way.
awesome to watch. Like,
That's
well,
awesome.
that's how they come up with this stuff, you know. Um, yeah, I cannot recommend this
Yeah.
enough, especially for people who are a little out of the I don't know, if you're a little older and you're like I just want to read a fun comic book, like this is a
Well,
great you can this one you can pick
I've
up
got like
anywhere.
three or four other
It's
things
great
I'm currently reading, but
to
I'm at
read
the
the
risk.
collected
I
editions
don't want
and
to go over
get
time,
that
so
those
I'll save
stories,
those for
but
later. Or if
it doesn't really
we
matter
need to
which
get a
one you start
website
with.
put up, and what we need to do is put, or even just like a page, and we can start putting up our lists there and run some commentary. I know you have your own blog as well, so I'm sure everything you're talking about is there too. But we'll get that. But I think I'll end with, just because I bought it
Sure.
this week, and just because it literally got me high. When was the last time you read a book and you felt like you were? I mean, you didn't feel like you were high after reading this book. That that's what this is. I was at Barnes and Noble, and it was one of those serendipitous kind of days where I'm like, I need to take a break. I just, I don't even go to Barnes and Noble much anymore, but I found myself over there. And I'm like, oh, I'm just browse around, and I often go just to the graphic novel section to see what they might have that I haven't noticed yet. And because I'm always looking for something different, my eye caught this book by Richard McGuire called Here. And you pull it out, and it looks like the cover looks like just a normal book that might have gotten placed there by mistake. I'm like, well, what is this? And I open it up, and it is a graphic novel in that the whole thing is drawn. There's story, but it's not. There's no dialogue panels. What you're seeing for 300 to 400 pages is the exact same room of a house over 3 billion years. And I can't even, I don't know, it's going to be hard for me to explain this. So you start off and you see like the focal point never changes. It's always that same exact perspective. And what you do is you go backwards and forwards in this book, and it shows you the life of the people who lived in this house, what the world looked like before this house. It layers different timelines over other timelines. It always shows you what year you're looking at. So right off the bat, it gives you 1957, and the house has got certain wallpaper, certain color scheme, and it shows you somebody come in. Then it jumps to the next page to 1942. It shows the house, different wallpaper, clear furniture. Shows you 2007. And then it starts to introduce characters, and it will bounce around. It'll show you like a storyline of one set of characters or one family, and it will break off, and it will come back later on. It might show you like a future, the ending of a story that they haven't started yet that will make sense later on. It shows you at some point. It shows you the house in 50,000 BC when the Ice Age was occupying that space. It shows you that in 3 billion BC when the Earth was still forming, so it's just all one big lava magma flow. They do cool things like in one scene, like they'll show you the house in 1986 while somebody's sleeping on the couch, while right next to that person in 1609, two Indians are humping each other. It's crazy, and then it shows you like some of the things fit together, some of them don't. You can go backwards and forwards. You can skip pages. You can go fast or slow. It shows you the house being constructed. It shows you it burning down, being constructed again. Like people in the far future coming back to this site and showing you what a house would have looked like. A dinosaur walks by at one point. It layers all these things together. By the time you're done with this, I sat there, and after about 20 minutes of flipping through this thing, I had a buzz. Like I was literally disoriented because you feel like you see time pass before your eyes at whatever pace you want. I can't describe it more than that. And if you go to Amazon and you're like, ooh, this sounds interesting, I want to buy it. Go to Amazon, you're going to see some mixed reviews because there's some people who are like, this isn't a graphic novel, fuck this. Because there's not a story in the traditional sense. There's not, it's not what you'd normally expect, but it very much is. It is, it's a graphic novel that it takes the format in a direction that I haven't seen it taken yet, and it really stretches the boundaries of what you can do with the format. And because it's a book, I was gonna buy this digitally, but I was like flipping through it. I'm like, I think it only has to be a book, because if it was digital, you couldn't flip through it at the speed you can here. If you're going really fast, it's almost like a like a cartoon, when you draw sequentially on pages and you flip through it that way, and you see the actual animation, you can go really fast and just see these layers of time build over each other and create this sense of story, because again, the perspective never changes. You're always either seeing that same fireplace or that same corner if the house is there, or you're seeing that space if the house isn't there. It shows you the town that was there before the house was there, the woods that were there. It's ridiculous. Again, it's called Here by Richard McGuire. If you're in a Barnes & Noble or in a bookstore, at least flip through it just so you can see what I'm talking about. But holy crap. I got back here and I'm just like, I just sit down because I'm like, I don't even know. And I'm even flipping through it right now feeling a little bit buzzed just flipping through this thing, because it gives you this sense that you're experiencing all of time at once. And I don't even know. I didn't know I could be affected that way by a book. So check that out, definitely. Again, it's cool. We ended on two different notes. We've got Axe Cop, which is very very much one thing, and this, which is very much a very different thing. So I kind of like, again, you and I, our tastes are very, I like that they're different enough. So if you're listening to this and you're like, you can't complain that we're giving you the same thing, or that we're too, I don't know, we're feeding you this from the same meal anyway. There's different, it's kind of like the buffet. Take what you will.
Well, and I mean, even when we first started talking about this, like I will enjoy again talking to you about comic books because you're coming to it with a sort of a fresh set of eyes on this, and even though hopefully the books I'm reading aren't cliched or something, like I'm definitely I get hooked on the things I get hooked on, and then when I first got back into it, I was experimenting with a lot of stuff, like picking up a lot of different things, and then I just kind of found like
nice.
Not necessarily a niche, but like I'll get hooked on a book and that's it. And so it's literally for years, I just go pick up Chew, I pick up Saga, I pick up Axe Cop, and that's been it, And I'll dabble around with single issues of DC or Marvel. but those have really been the collections that I'm hooked on, you know? And so it's great to hear your perspective of like these one-offs, especially like Nightly News, and now here like something that I can reclaim
Hmm.
that feeling of just being blown away on like, something that's
Yeah,
already
yeah.
nicely wrapped up. I guess that's what it is. It's hard to
Well,
say,
yeah,
well,
and
I'm
that's
invested in these
honestly that I'll
three
go back to that
stories.
store I visited in Portland,
Let me
like the
go get
big,
invested
the
in
big
something
sort of
else, you know? I mean,
overstocked
that's
store.
always there's always sort of a
I
precious
literally
use of our
I was
time
just
in that way.
overwhelmed. I didn't even know where to start. So fortunately, this dude was a really good curator. He knew where everything was, meticulously. But I was just like, I mean, I had at one point I had like 8 things in my hand. I'm like, I don't have time for all this. Like, I gotta pick like 2 or 3 things that I will read now while I'm on
Yeah.
vacation. And I literally said out loud, I'm like, what? How do you? Where does this end? He's like, oh, there's always good stories. He's like, just you lock in on the things that you have time for, and when you're done, there's always something new. I was like, all right. I guess that's a good problem to have instead of being like, well, I've hit the end. There's nothing else. What do I do? Where do I go from here? So it's cool to know. And again, I'm looking at 4 other things that we haven't even talked about that I'm reading now that are completely different and all intriguing. And I'll put them on the website or we'll talk about them in future issues. But oh my god, like I've to have fallen down this rabbit hole into this world of like these again what I traditionally thought of as comics or graphic novels up until even 2 or 3 years ago. This blows the door wide open on that, and I think largely a lot of that is just the market or the art the artists or writers themselves kind of now going to a place where they hadn't before. I think the stories being written now are probably they're kind of aligning with my expectations more than they would have at any other time previously, just because there is so much freedom and there is so much to choose from and so many different other stories to be inspired by and artists who want to break conventions more than normal. So I feel it's that ethos that things like The Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen came out of in the late 80s. Now everybody's sort of swimming in that same pool. Like, what can we do that's new and different, and what can we do to break out of the mold that everybody knows, and where can we take it from here? I think that's the most exciting part about all this stuff.
Well, and I think
Ah, yes.
part of that excitement that I feel when I go through these things is that same feeling of when
Mm-hmm.
music started to become digitized and was able to be shared and explored, virtually much faster than it ever had been before. And that's what's happening in comics as well, obviously. And it has been happening for a long time, but I feel like comics were a little bit slow on the uptake of like, how did we
Yeah,
distribute this
yeah.
digitally? How do we make it look good? Yeah, how do we get the word out and stuff like that? And so we're in that, new golden age of it, I think. At least that's how I feel. I mean, that's why Comic Cons are
I would
bigger than
say,
ever, and
yeah,
for all
absolutely.
the the bitching about from
Yeah, yeah,
certain friends of
yeah.
mine about how it's not about the comics anymore. Like it literally is about the comics. A lot of it, like it's if you're not into comics, you're going to be really
Oh God.
confused
Well,
at a
on that
Comic Con.
note, let's uh
So
let's wrap up. Do you have
it's
anything you wanna push
it's
or
yeah,
promote or
it is
plug?
like a golden age, and there's something like literally we could talk all night about this, I'm sure. So as always, go to my website, heytade.com.
Yeah.
And I'm on Twitter at heytade. And so I've been putting these, basically, that's the only place to find the podcast right now, unless we're directing people
Well,
to
we'll get a website
SoundCloud.
going. We'll get a
So,
Facebook page going, that kind of stuff too. In
uh,
the meantime, I'm just
I'll keep putting up the
taylortrask.com,
podcast on heytade.com, and you can
TAYLORTLASK,
discuss them there
and
or
you'll
discuss them on
see,
SoundCloud,
my
whatever you want to
scattered
do.
blog entries and other stuff, and I'm going to be adding to that soon anyway too. So check that out. I'm sure we'll have more as we do more episodes. The website will grow, and if you're listening to this now and we've done 20 episodes, then you've seen kind of what we've gone into, or if we've stopped and we hated each other. Now we split apart like the Eagles or something. You'll be able to listen to this and go, well, I knew them back when they were cool and underground and hip. So either way, because I say that because I'm listening. Yes, we can. That's been the show. Thanks, thanks. Well, wait. Let's see.
I,
Fleetwood Mac. How about no? That's probably
I
too
can't
serious.
go out on an
Who
Eagles
who who in your
reference.
world?
Oh my God. That's killing me. Oh my God.
Well,
I
on
don't
that
know.
note,
I don't
I'm
know.
Taylor Trask.
Whatever those things are in that movie with the baby wizard
Awesome. Well,
that
we'll
like
talk to you
sucked the
guys
life
soon.
out of him. That's what just happened to me. Yeah, and I'm Todd A, and that's episode 1, huh?